Today we are here with Russ Edelman, the President and CEO of Corridor Consulting. He's the author of the Nice Guy Can Get the Corner Office. He's been featured on ABC, NBC, Fox News, and Forbes magazine. You are smart, you're intelligent, you're trustworthy, you're a connector, and most importantly, you're a nice person. So I wanted to find out, did you write the book, Nice Guy Can Get the Corner Office, because you had some difficulties with being nice?
Well, yes. First off, thank you very much for the compliments. I do appreciate that, and the feeling is very much mutual. And as for the book, the origin of the book came as a result of some self-reflection, which was not so much that I was nice, but at times I was too nice. And that ultimately is what led to the book and the preceding article in HBR. And since then, it's been quite an exciting ride in terms of seeing how it's been exposed to people and how they've appreciated it. So yeah, neat stuff for sure.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about your book.
The premise of the book is all about how to help nice guys overcome their issues in terms of being actually too nice. So nice is good. Being too nice is actually bad. And actually, the book consists of three main themes. It's actually all about the nice guy syndrome. Then it's all about, the second part would be all about how people need to overcome their nice guy syndrome tendencies. And then it's also from a corporate perspective, how is it that you actually help the people that are in your business that are too nice? Mm-hmm. Alrighty, and each one of those chapters speaks to what we refer to as our Bill of Rights. So things such as, you have the right to speak up, you have the right to confront issues, the right to define boundaries, the right to win. Because oftentimes the nice guy feels suppressed in terms of being able to actually benefit on their own, because they're always so concerned about helping everyone else out to their detriment. Mm-hmm. So that was basically the premise behind the book. And when people ask me about it, the general sense is that oftentimes people in business struggle to achieve the success they have the potential to because they're simply just too nice. Mm-hmm. And nice is good, too nice is bad, just like being a jerk is bad. Mm-hmm. So that's what actually drove the book and its success.
Now, who is the target audience for this book? Are you writing this book for CEOs and decision makers, or is this something could be applied by anybody within the organization?
Well, because there's two flavors to the book, there's two themes. One of which is how do I personally grow as a nice guy, as well as also there's the other piece too in terms of what happens when I have nice people that work for me, or overly nice people. So, I want to make sure I'm using the correct language in terms of that. Nice is good, overly nice or too nice, bad. Alrighty, so oftentimes you might have an employee who just does not deal with the situation appropriately. They bend over backwards to the point where they don't get their own work done, or it might be something along the lines of where they're running into the situation for themselves. So, one of the interesting stats we actually had from our surveys was that 50% of the people we surveyed, which there were close to about 400 people, 50% of the people came back and said they thought their bosses were too nice. Mm-hmm. So think about that. Their bosses were simply just too nice. And as a result, their bosses were not actually sticking up for the right issues.
But mm-hmm. one thing I see about speaking up, practicing candor, making mm-hmm. people accountable, if you go too far, then you can also become a jerk.
Yes.
So,
and there's a whole premise that we actually introduced in the book, which you're probably familiar with, called nice guy whiplash. Mm-hmm. So when all of a sudden one pushes the nice guy envelope and they're nice, and all of a sudden they might snap, and then all of a sudden what happens is they go the other way and they actually become inappropriately confrontational. They basically take the other extreme and become the opposite of what too nice is, which is the jerk. Mm-hmm. So that's basically what we've seen out there.
And in your book, you have interviewed great group of successful CEOs, decision makers, thought leaders from the industry. Interviewed Herb Keller from Southwest Airlines. You interviewed John Pepper, the ex-CEO of Procter & Gamble. By talking to all these different CEOs, tell me a little bit, who was the most interesting person you met and why?
Yeah, I get asked that one a lot. So I'll give you two, because I think that they had different impact on me. Actually, all of them were great. It was really a fantastic experience. That was probably, for me, the highlight of writing the book, is to actually meet face-to-face with these folks and get their perspective. It was an executive MBA on steroids. In terms of the two, I would probably pick Herb Kelleher. There's a spirit and determination that Herb has that is untouched by some of the others that I'd met with. And it was just incredible. And an example of part of the story was, we were only scheduled to meet for 1 hour. And I flew down. He was so consumed by the discussion, as was I, that rather than just saying goodbye at his office, which by the way is in the center of the building, he is actually not in the corner, All the executives sit in the center, which is interesting. He actually walked me outside to my car, which is really fascinating. And when he walked out into the lobby, everyone stopped. And everyone just looked. And it was almost as if there was a silent applause for what he had done in that business.
Sure. Now, Russ, I know that a lot of times people write books and they already have a framework set up.
Yes.
And they go and interview people and trying to get the information in order to justify their framework.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did you begin with that 8 steps framework, or is that something you have developed after finishing all the interviews?
Yeah, the actual framework came before the actual interviews, and then it was validated and refined as we went through. And in fact, the steps actually, or the rights, were actually much longer in terms of number. And then what happened was, as we went through, we realized that it was too much, and we brought it down. So when I say we, what happened was I was the guy who came up with the original idea around this concept. When the HB article came out, I actually had brought on a co-writer on, Tim Hildebittel, and a longtime friend and business colleague. And then what happened was we brought another gentleman on, Chuck Manns, as a third writer. So the three of us, the three amigos, actually wrote this book. And it was exciting, you know. And so collectively, when we took a look at this, we actually really refined those chapters to be reflective of what we felt were the key elements that someone needed to deal with in terms of nice guy syndrome.
Russ, I know that over the years you have built multiple successful companies. Tell us, how did you ended up starting your own business?
This current business, which is now in place for 15 years, Corridor Consulting, what happened was, so I was born and raised in the New York, New Jersey area, so near and dear. And what happened was, I had helped to grow, I was a partner in another business, a systems integration business that had grown quite nicely. And at a certain point I realized that I needed to live someplace else other than New Jersey. Not that there's anything wrong with New Jersey at all. So I wanted to be far enough away but still not too far, and I felt that it was either going to be DC or Boston. And so I elected to actually move up to Boston and start another business, and it was a subset of what my prior company was, with intent. So I started down that path with the intent of actually then supporting large global companies and helping them out with their collaboration technologies and process. And then the company just continued to excel and grow from there. So,
now, when you started your business, is that somebody who influenced you to start the business?
yeah, it's a good question. You know, I can't point to one particular person who said, "Go start a business, go do something." I think it's been inspired by the confluence of all sorts of other folks actually that I talk with, that I speak with, and just to try to fine-tune a value proposition around this business that made sense and one that I could deliver on.
Sure.
So that was the basic premise behind, you know, how Corridor started.
Why do you think your company became successful?
Well, I think we're successful. We, of course, like every other company, have its challenges, and I think the elements of Corridor that make it a bit more unique. There are a few. So I think we re-geared the company to focus specifically on SharePoint, and we only did that when we actually saw the pre-releases of Microsoft SharePoint in late 2005, and specifically the version of SharePoint 2007. Prior to that, we didn't believe it actually was enterprise-worthy. 2007 came out, and despite its imperfections, what happened was we found it gained enough ground to really build the momentum that it has today. So fantastic technology. And in terms of, you know, how we've positioned ourselves, we didn't want to be everything to all people. And even within the context of SharePoint, we chose to go down a particular route as well. So rather than saying we're everything that SharePoint can do, we said let's focus on a few particular and discrete areas and build up momentum and expertise in that capacity. So one piece is all about SharePoint as an ECM platform. The second piece then is all about how we can actually build now business applications specifically on top of SharePoint. And that's a venture for us over the past 5 years that's really proven to be very successful. So now we build mission critical business applications that sit on top of SharePoint for global companies. And they're using it to solve, in this particular case, contract management, proposal management is coming out, as well as RFQ management, and a collection of other business apps that sit on top of SharePoint.
When you started your company, and I know you're running your company for 15 years now, did you begin with end in mind? What is your exit plan?
Well, it's a great question. So I think the ultimate end game would be to sell the business, you know, and probably stick around with the business for a while and add value in that capacity. You know, I think that's where I'm at right now. And then there are 15 other ideas that I've got lined up that I want to pursue. However, I am really very passionate about what Corridor represents, and I think the acquisition from another company, a larger company, into Corridor, I think, especially with our product orientation on top of SharePoint, is a great fit, you know, at the appropriate time. And we've actually been requested to explore relationships on a number of cases where companies have come after us, and I've held off just because I want to continue to build the product component of the business, because I think it continues to add value in terms of the overall equity of the business.
You have 15 other ideas that you want to pursue.
Right.
And I know that you're an entrepreneur in mind. You have a lot of passion. And how do you control yourself? How do you stop doing those, working on those other products?
Listen to my wife first. Because she will guide me accordingly and say, listen, stay focused, which I totally agree with. And I think that's the name of the game. And there are so many opportunities to chase butterflies, all right, for lack of a better term, where you can go and pursue all sorts of different ideas. And I think making the right decision, that's where I have failed and where I have succeeded is driven mostly by the decisions and the priorities that I make in terms of which path do I want to go down and does it make sense. So, for instance, on the sales front, when opportunities come in that aren't necessarily in our sweet spot, what will happen is we evaluate them and we say, is this a situation where from a cash flow perspective we actually want that revenue coming in, or is this a strategic opportunity where it makes sense for a client so we can actually embed further, to add value in that capacity? So we'll take a look proactively in that way to make some smart decisions, and that's sales oriented. I think in terms of, and again using SharePoint as the vehicle, there are so many. SharePoint is not just it's not just one solution specifically. It addresses so many different dimensions of what businesses need. So you need to focus in on a few particular areas of it. Otherwise, it's just overwhelming in terms of what SharePoint will do, and people go tilt pretty quickly with that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you were pointing out earlier about, you said the keyword failures.
Yes.
You are an extremely successful person. Everybody know about your success story, the companies that you have built, the books you have written. Share some of your failure stories with us.
Let's see. So there are some common failures that I've experienced. Let's see. So let's start on the people front. All right. There's people and there's pursuits. How about that? So on the people front, I think the biggest failures that I've had are, I think as a result of being sometimes too nice. I mean, this is at the heart of what the book is about, and that is that I believed in people, and they could be great people. They could be phenomenal. However, they're not necessarily the right people at the right time for this business. And I think I believed in them to the point where that actually compromised some of the business. So there was a VP of sales that I brought on, and he was a great guy, fantastic guy, and we had so much fun together. And he was great with clients. However, in terms of being able to progress deals forward and actually close business in ways that were substantive and meaningful and repeatable, he just wasn't able to come to the table with that. And yet I believed in him to the point where I overlooked those. So for an extra year, or no, he was with us for a year, so for an extra 6 months, I should have let him go after 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I kept him around for a year. And so
we all make those type of mistakes.
Yeah, and I actually kind of categorize failures into there's little failures and there's big failures. Mm-hmm. And we have a collection of all of them across the board. And it is speaking to everything that you're about, it's all about how you learn from those failures, how you embrace them, how you embed them into, how you adjust. And it's not necessarily just the retrospective on what you've done, but it's taking that into account for the future. And that's part of the value proposition that allows you to excel and grow further. So yes, I messed this up, I screwed this up, I did this. How do I institutionalize that, not only in my head, but also in the other people that I work with, so we can avoid some of those lessons learned, so take advantage of the lessons learned to avoid making those same mistakes.
What are the biggest challenges you have faced recently or faced over the terms of your business period?
They're the economic downturns, which I think every business needs to contend with. On that front, interesting enough, SharePoint has actually been, I think, anti-down-proof in certain respects. Reason being is that we found that because Microsoft offers a free version, companies were willing to embrace it. Already, and so then they would spend on the professional services side and maybe some add-on product components to make a difference in terms of really adding value back into what they were doing with SharePoint. So that's one piece. I think one of the biggest failures that we ran into was prior to getting involved with SharePoint, and that was late, sometime in 2006, all right, time frame. After we had seen it in 2005, we said let's go down the path of SharePoint. But prior to that, we were working with what I'd refer to as the legacy ECM technologies. It was the OpenText, the Documentums, the FileNets, companies like that, Kofaxes, and those technologies in many respects are great in their own rights. However, there's a new sheriff. And the sheriff is SharePoint. All right, and what we had found was that while we continued to believe and strive for these other technologies to actually succeed, their persistence and progression was thwarted quite a bit as a result of what SharePoint came when SharePoint came to the table, and specifically SharePoint 2007. So I think the business actually took a downfall, prior to actually making the move over to SharePoint, and we said, there are opportunities. Where do we want to invest our time? And at that point, that's one of those key decision elements, and that was when we said, what we need to do is we need to determine, do we want to stay with legacy because we had existing customers there and they had not yet wanted to make the move to SharePoint, or do we actually want to transition over? And so we took the hit. We said, okay, let's reduce in size, let's reduce in revenue, let's do this, and let's take our expertise and rejigger it and reapply it in the context of SharePoint. And so we did that and we transitioned, and now, again, it's been great for us. We've got a great team, great clients, and we're just looking to grow and continue to learn as we go.
About what makes a person right person, and your framework, a person must be smart, disciplined, and spirit. Is this the qualities when you look for when you hire consultant for your company, hire
Sure.
employees for your companies? Is there anything else you look for?
Based upon the foundation of those three, what happens is you delve into, you peel back the onion skin further. So what does smart mean? So smart in the context of consultants or developers that we bring on, or project managers or business people, whatever it might be, you have to take a look at them in the context of what they would be doing. And do they exhibit and demonstrate not just the smart? Here's a key part about this, Russell. It's not necessarily just the smarts of what they've done in the past, but it is the smarts of how they're planning for the future. And I think this is a key piece, and it's something I've become incredibly passionate about, and that is that you cannot rest on your laurels. Show me how it is that people are saying, I'm making a difference, not just for what I've done in the past, but how I've taken what I've learned in the past and evolved that into the future. And if they can't tell a story about that substance, then they're not necessarily the right person for us. All right, so that's, I think, the piece around the smarts. On the spirit, how is it they rise to the occasion? What happens in terms of how they deal with tough situations? How do they actually motivate other people? And a key piece for me is, how do they motivate other people when they're not necessarily their manager? True inspirational leadership comes from, at least in my mind, when you're not necessarily the boss of folks. So one of the guys that I spent time with was the gentleman who actually is the CEO of American Cancer Society, all right, and Dr. John Sefrin, and great guy. And so he manages, I think the number was over 2 million people. Now think about that, 2 million people. Now, of course, the large number there was volunteers. And he was a very interesting guy in terms of his management style, because he said, they're not on my payroll, these people. I can't call them up and say, because I'm paying you, you need to do this. He said he had to figure out ways that actually were aligned with the vision of what he was trying to do with the organization, and then try to help these people in terms of adopting that and growing them accordingly. But
So you think that the way I'm curious about the story that he doesn't pay all volunteer work. How did he rally the team? He talked about the organizational purpose, the bigger purpose, and
yeah,
what was the method?
Well, here was the crux of the story that he shared with me. It was a fascinating one. He said, American Cancer Society had, for its history, been a very distributed organization, different centers around the country, and that was how they were, and that's how the volunteers behaved. And he felt that in order for the organization to grow and evolve beyond what it had been so far, he had to take it up to a different level. And he felt the way to do it, from my recollection, from my discussion with him, was that he actually had to go through a process where he had to regionalize more, he had to consolidate and bring more continuity into the respective different areas of the organization. And it was a huge litmus test for him, because what he found was that his leadership was challenged and questioned. And at the end of the day, he stuck to his guns. He said, for all of the right reasons, I believe this is the right thing to do for the organization. And at the end of the day, people actually came on board with him, and actually the organization grew as a result of that. So it's a fascinating story, but it was one where he didn't necessarily have the carrot. He actually had to inspire and influence people based upon a vision, and then execute on that vision to show them how they were able to be more successful.
It's a great, inspiring story.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the hiring question. When you talked about smart is more than just being intelligence, is planning for the future. You talked about spirit, where the person needs to have the ability to make the right decision under tough situations. What other qualities you're looking for?
Well, I think there's the discipline. How does one make sure that they don't just do the first 80%, 85%, Already, that they actually get the balance of the job done the right way? How are they disciplined to make sure they're getting it done in a way that allows them to achieve success? And now, I caution you in this discussion here, because at one point I was actually all about writing a book called The Last 5%. Mm-hmm. And I realized that it isn't necessarily about the last 5%. It's about the last percent that makes sense for the actual project or opportunity at hand. Because the reason I bring this up is that for some, they will go to a point where they are so detailed that they compromise their ability to succeed. They are so focused in the weeds and the details that they don't get the job done. So while they might have painted this perfect picture, the bus already left, and people are no longer interested in taking a look at the picture they actually painted. So finding this right balance is key, and having a discipline that allows them to be mindful of what their audience is interested in, already, and to be able to calibrate towards that will make a big difference as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Russ, do you personally get involved hiring every single top consultant for your company, or is there somebody else who's doing it?
Well, we have other people, and we put them through a rigorous step of actually meeting with a variety of different folks. Mm-hmm. But typically, I'll have some involvement in terms of making the final decision on someone. Sure. And I mean, they represent Corridor, and so I want to be able to have some opinion in terms of if they're going to be able to do what's needed. Mm-hmm. Now as the company continues to grow, that might necessarily be the case, and we're looking at expanding internationally over to London. Mm-hmm. We have offices over in Vietnam as well. So it's exciting, mm-hmm. and the people over in Vietnam, that's actually more contained. In the UK would probably actually get more involved there, but then eventually get some leadership that that would probably be a little bit out of my domain in terms of going over there each time.
Why do you think SharePoint is so popular? Why do you think Microsoft, this was one of their highest growth product?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We're constantly assessing that, and I think, when I net it down, I think there are two factors. I think there's an ease of use element, and there's a flexibility element that actually drive the adoption. So those two pieces are what really is making a difference. Now, it's a double-edged sword with SharePoint, because on one hand, it is so simple to stand up and get going, and users just love that part about it. But on the other hand, when you're dealing with these enterprise deployments, what happens is you need to take them seriously. And oftentimes companies will actually just throw it out there, and they say, if you build it, they will come and start to use it. And that's not necessarily a plausible strategy. In fact, I actually got an email from a client this morning, and they're just about ready to deploy SharePoint on a global basis. And he actually said, I can quote him, he said, I have some jitters. I have some jitters about SharePoint. And he said, please allay those jitters and make me feel a bit more confident. And I said, it's appropriate to have jitters on an enterprise platform. Mm-hmm. All right, it simply is. And the people that don't have the jitters are those that are not taking it seriously. SharePoint, if you're going to deploy it at an enterprise level, you need to take it in a serious fashion. And so I think that address some of his concerns, and you have to plan for it accordingly. So at least that's what I've seen so far in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Russ, the fact that you are on the IT industry, what's your overall observation of information technology industry? What direction is moving? Do you see some changes? Do you see different type of trend?
I think generally it's still completely overwhelming for people. I think the amount of information that people are trying to consume and manage is at the point where they don't necessarily know which way to go, which is why we see a lot of organizations trying to put tools in the hands of the actual end users where they can actually manage the information more effectively, and then introduce some level of standardization. So it's a vague answer to a vaguer question, but it's a challenge. I think generally just people are overwhelmed with how much is coming at them right now. Mm-hmm. So to be able to tackle that and do it in some capacity, you're far ahead in the curve.
SharePoint is all about collaboration, about communicating with the employees and communicating with others. How does social media changes the impact of SharePoint? Can you take the concepts of social media, can you integrate into SharePoint?
Well, it already is integrated into SharePoint, so SharePoint does have some social media capabilities. Mm-hmm. I think where companies are struggling, not just with SharePoint as a social media technology, it's twofold. Number one is, when one defines social media, there's the question as to, or collaboration, which I think is an alter ego to mm-hmm. social media. What does one mean? So for some, collaboration in social media means I can chat with my friends, I can post pictures, I can post documents. For others, it means that I have discussion threads, I do voting. I can work collaboratively online at the same time on a document. So everyone has a different definition, and I think people are trying to, rustle up what that actually means. And internally within an organization, I think companies are really struggling because they are saying we are just so pressed with all sorts of tools coming at us, which way do we go, and people will find the path of least resistance. So SharePoint has become a bit more of that. So now companies are starting to use more of that. However, the definition of collaboration is varied. Now, that's the first part, which is how does one define collaboration or social media? The second piece then is, well, how does that compete with the social media or public social media? Already, and there's an article that we're actually in the process of working with myself and a colleague, and we're actually calling it the community of purpose as compared to the community of interest. And we think it's an interesting concept that actually has permanence within a company as compared to communities of interest, which I think are much broader. Right? Communities of interest are driven typically by people who do have a common interest. Communities of purpose could be people with diverse backgrounds, diverse interests, but yet they have a purposeful intent to get something done. And it should have a beginning and an end. So you'll see us writing about that in a bit. And we have a lot of stats and data to actually support that as well.
Our experience with Microsoft is great. It's a great company
Yes.
to work with. What's your overall experience working with Microsoft, and what do you think about their partnership model?
Well, so we actually operate with Microsoft in a few different capacities. So we're a partner of theirs, a key partner. We are also they are a client of ours. So we actually support their legal group in certain capacities. We also are tied in at the product management level as well as also the R&D level. So we have relationships in a few different capacities. And my general observation is that Microsoft is a phenomenal vehicle. Not just Microsoft as a company, but how it feeds an ecosystem that is unrivaled. I've just never seen any organization help to build an infrastructure of companies that help to add value into the economy.
And you probably know the statistics, 95% of the Microsoft revenue is coming through
partners, yeah.
partner like ours. It's such a fantastic business model.
It's a great model, and I think the biggest struggle that we have with Microsoft is not taking advantage of all the great resources they provide. Mm-hmm. So I think that they put so much through the partner channel, and trying to get your arms around it is probably the biggest thing that we confront right now.
How do you define leadership? What is your leadership style?
My hope would be when people think of me as a leader, they think that regardless of the folks that I'm talking to and engaging with, I'm adding value. In some capacity or another, I can make a difference. All right, and if I can't do that, then I feel I'm failing with my mission. Beyond that, I think it's incumbent upon a leader to think not just 5 steps ahead, but it's 5 steps ahead as well as also with those steps there's an option A, B, and C. I should be thinking proactively about, well, if this doesn't work, then I should be thinking about this, and if that doesn't work, I should be thinking about this, and what are the repercussions of that? I think one of the important lessons learned from one of the CEOs that I actually spent time with, and this was a great one. He said, "Be prepared to stay pretty mediocre or not achieve the success you have the potential to if you will not allow your leadership team to be able to do things in their own way. And it might be different from yours, but you need to be able to say it's okay. And while different, if they can be successful and conform to the same levels of quality that are needed, then that can actually help to grow the overall ethos of the business." Mm-hmm. So in that regard, I get really excited. So I think that's a great point from a leadership perspective.
I came up with recently a framework that what are the qualities a leader must have, and I call this framework Vista, and I was trying to analyze you on the eyes of my framework, and I believe that the Vista stands for a leader must be visionary. The leaders must have the ability to see the future. A leaders must be inspiring, smart, intelligent. A leaders must be honest, trustworthy.
Sure.
And leaders must be competent, able.
Yeah.
So I came up with this framework. What's your assessment about this framework? Does it make sense?
I think the framework makes a ton of sense. And all those I think are elements that I think are inclusive of being a strong leader. And I've stuck to this as a general as 3 basic principles in terms of to be successful. All right, so here's one take, and I actually shared this with Herb Kelleher to the point where he said, that was quite phenomenal. So I actually made a little plaque up with these 3. So I said, to be successful, 3 pieces, very simple. One must have the smarts, one must have discipline, and one must have spirit. And it's the blending of those 3. In some capacity or another, they can allow you to achieve this fantastic success.
How you lead when the organization is doing well versus how you lead when the organization is in crisis sometimes changes.
How?
Do you think people lead differently when they're in crisis, and if so, how?
Well,
what?
Yeah, I thought about that question a bit. So when in crisis mode, do I fundamentally change my behavior? And I thought about this, and I thought that I didn't necessarily know if I change my behavior. I think I change the tempo and the priorities by which I focus. So I think the tempo is when all of a sudden dealing with a crisis, something that I might otherwise keep a pulse on, once every few weeks, it might be something that I'm checking every few hours. And then again, I'm a big believer in when confronting an issue, I have an option A, B, and C. Let's think about the pluses and minuses of each of those options, and then take steps accordingly. So I find that the tempo consolidates down to a much more rapid pace, so you can make smarter decisions on a real-time basis. And then I think your priorities change based upon, I think, the circumstances that you're faced with. So, and you need to be mindful, and sometimes you've got to take the tough steps when you're in crisis mode. So if it means you're not buying snacks for the office or other goodies, whatever it might be, while you're in crisis mode, then so be it. Focus on the things that are more substantive, and focus on making sure you're getting revenue in the door, that you're satisfying clients, that you're making them happy. And at times, people just have to suck it up. They just have to say, we need to do what we need to do in order to get over the hump. And there are what I refer to as periods of suck. It's just the nature of the beast with everyone, personally and professionally. But I think at the end, there is an end in sight, and you make your way through, and then you need to, again, be reflective in terms of what it is that you've learned, and so that way you can try to minimize that for the future.
How do you develop team culture within your organization?
It's a great question, first off. At the fundamental level, the work has to be engaging, and it has to be right for the people. Because you can have as much rah-rah environment as you want. You can have all the different gaming and fun and thrills. But if at the end of the day people are not genuinely interested and engaged in what they're doing, then I think what will happen is there will be atrophy within the business. Beyond that, the notion of building trust, expecting results, I think allowing people to feel comfortable with what they're doing, and also to allow them to understand that they can make mistakes. And again, before we talked about small failures and big failures. Now, obviously, we can't afford a lot of big failures. However, small failures are part of the game of learning. It just naturally is. So I think, if you're on them as a result of, hey, they made a mistake and you're all over them for actually making that mistake, then what's going to happen is their interest in going beyond their boundaries will wither. They will all of a sudden say, listen, I will conform to what it is that I'm supposed to be doing. But if you say it's okay to actually press a bit further, all right, and try to make some mistakes, and obviously it can't have a negative impact with client work and stuff like that, but if you can help them in that capacity, then they will grow. And that helps, I think, build the trust. There's also the whole notion of introducing some type of gaming theory, all right, and that is, how do you introduce some level of healthy contention, to inspire people to say how it is that they can better themselves and hold people accountable in terms of, contest things along that line. So I think that's a fun dimension. The other thing too, we talked about the trust building. This is something I'd written about this in the book, and we are huge believers in 360-degree feedback. All right, so we find it's a big part of what we try to introduce into the culture. Now here's what we found though. This was actually you talk about a learning point for me. A long time ago, we had a crew in. The company was a certain size. This is before we were involved with SharePoint, and we actually had a guy from Finland in, and he'll go nameless, but great guy. And we'd introduced the peer-to-peer reviews, and what happened was, after he had done the reviews, and everyone was coming back with peer reviews, and everyone was rating each other great. And then I found out there was a little collusion that everyone was basically coming back saying, "Listen, great, great," and I realized that what it did was it compromised their ability to grow and to learn, because the people on the street who are working together, those are the best people to judge with regard to how their peers are making out. More so than if I'm a manager sitting back and I shouldn't say sitting back, but basically overseeing people who are out in the field as consultants. Well, I might get feedback from clients and I might hear from them directly. It's the peers that are actually working with them which can actually provide some evaluation. So I find that the peer evaluation becomes pretty critical. But when everyone was actually rating everyone very highly, I found it actually compromised the integrity of course, the peer ratings. So what I did was I instituted a factor, and it had bite, it had real bite, because what basically took place is I said, if I or your manager find that you are giving inappropriate gradings to people, then your bonus will be cut down to 25% of what it otherwise would be. It was a huge financial impact. Alrighty, and it changed the behavior. But more importantly, what happened was we said, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to allow people to learn how to grow from others. And I said, as long as you can construct an environment where people feel comfortable expressing that, then it's a phenomenal vehicle for growth.
I like the idea. I might even apply it within
Yeah.
my own organization.
Yeah. I think it makes a big difference, and you need to set the tone, though. You know, I think that's a key piece of how this has to work. The guy from Finland came back, and he basically said, I cannot provide opinion on anybody else, and he was the hardest guy to get over. You know, but ultimately, when he was able to get some constructive feedback from some others without it being attacking, he said this has really been an incredible and helpful experience, and it really changed things for him.
Russ, I must tell you that this interview was a great learning experience for me. I feel like I can talk to you for hours.
The feeling's mutual, Russell.
Yeah, and thank you very much.
Oh, it's a pleasure.